Hello there. Welcome to our meeting at the campfire. I hope you're all having a good weekend. Happy Thanksgiving to my fellow Americans and happy Friday night, Saturday to everyone else. Tonight we are going to be watching one we watched last year. I showed this one on Christmas Day last year, in fact. It's called Silent Night, Bloody Night. And it is definitely an interesting movie. Hopefully you will enjoy it. You will have to let me know how the volume is for me and for the movie, if I need to turn the movie volume up or down. So let us get right into our Christmas movie.
One last time, I have to see this ground. It's beautiful now, as if nothing had happened here. Soon they will tear down the main house, and then nothing will be left. Nothing. Except what I remember. I grew up in the town nearby, where my father was the mayor, and where this house stood, waiting for me. It was built by Wilfred Butler. We had never seen him, and he never lived at home. Until the day before Christmas in 1950, he finally did come back. For the last time.
Took chestnuts roasting on an open fire a little too literally there, dude. Little too literally. Also, apparently he was absent the day they taught stop, drop, and roll.
All of us believed that his death was an accident. No one knew that another person had come to Butler House that Christmas.
As Deputy Coroner of the County of Arlington, State of Massachusetts, I hereby find, upon evidence of an autopsy conducted by the medical examiner of this county, that the deceased, Wilfred Butler, died as a result of burns inflicted accidentally upon himself on his own premises during the afternoon of December 24th, 1950. No further inquiry shall be held over the body of the deceased, and this inquest is officially closed.
After the coroner's inquest, on New Year's Day, they buried Wilfred Butler. There was no one there to mourn him. It was the funeral of a stranger.
I, Wilfred Butler, being of sound mind and body, at least what the world considers sound, do hereby leave my house and its grounds and all personal effects within that house to my only surviving relation, my grandson, Jeffrey Butler. And I solemnly charge him with one duty. Let him leave the house as I left it, standing untouched to remind the world of its inhumanity and cruelty.
For 20 years, that house lay empty, exactly as Wilfred left it. And then, last year, rumors began that it was finally being sold. The newspaper story traveled through the county to a state hospital for the criminally insane.
Eunice Tammy, thank you very much for the follow. Welcome to the Campfire Club. Glad to have you here.
The man who came to sell the house had never seen it. He was a lawyer from the city, just doing a job and enjoying it.
Stop and look serious, please. Oh, you're hopeless. Oh, look.
Hey, wait, where you going now? The mayor's gonna have a fit, kid.
One more shot.
Come on.
Stay there. I want to all together. And smile.
For all the news as it happens, stay tuned to WLIX, your voice of the Northeast. This is Roger Fowler with local stories. First, today's headlines. A warehouse fire still rages in Elizabeth. Police suspect arson. That escaped inmate at Margaretville State Hospital still at large, still hunted by state police. And over in Roxbury, the city passes a controversial housing code.
Momentarily, the film decided to be the birds.
Well, didn't I tell you? It's beautiful.
Can we see the rest of it?
Honey, that was it. I think the mayor's waiting for me.
My love is such an important man.
Right. Laura always says that.
Darling,
What?
don't be long.
Honey, if you get bored, just look at the view. Sooner or later, that viaduct's gonna take us back home.
Mr. Carter.
Mr. Mayor.
Let me introduce you. This is Charlie Toman, who publishes our weekly newspaper, The Patriot.
Mr. Tolman?
And this is Tess Howard.
How do you do?
She operates our switchboard.
Oh, really?
We call her the communications director. And this is Bill Mason,
Mason?
our sheriff. Won't you sit there, Mr. Carter, at the head of the table?
Thank you. I didn't expect to meet you all together. It's quite a reception. All right, let's begin. As you know, I've been retained by Jeffrey Butler. The matter concerns the house that he inherited from his grandfather, Wilfred Butler.
Go on, Mr. Carter.
I believe that you offered to buy the house for my client.
Offered. We begged him. We wrote letters and
That's
we...
enough, Tess.
Well, it's true.
Trouble. There's always trouble.
I can sympathize.
I spent the last 20 years and more driving people away from there. Prowlers, burglars, kids, they're the worst. Chasing for nothing because of that will. That drivel about humanity. No. Inhumanity. What the hell is that, huh?
Yes, well, he was a bitter man.
Hate.
Must have been very hard.
It must have been hate.
That man hated. Well, some people are like that.
Don't kill the doggy. Don't hurt the doggy. Don't do it. Why did you have to hurt the innocent doggy? Just there was no reason. That is pure evil. Hey, Sober. I know, poor puppers. Puppers deserved better.
The question is, well, do you still want the house?
Are you offering it to us, Mr. Carter?
Exactly.
Why now?
I want a bell like that.
Well, that's Mr. Butler's business, isn't it?
You know we're not
Every time
rich.
someone says something and I want their attention, I just
Most
bang
of
on
us
the bell.
came here during the Depression.
Yeah, but the
But we
Depression's
love this
over.
town. It's our
Surely you
home.
made money since then.
And
naturally you want to improve it.
Exactly.
My client understands that, and he fully sympathizes, and he's willing to sacrifice the house for $50,000 in cash by noon tomorrow.
That's an awful lot of cash.
It's also an awfully good bargain.
You could go to Wilton. You could go now to the bank.
Am I clearly understood?
Or we could all just sit here and stare at each other.
All that cash.
Perfect. I'll wait for your answer till tomorrow.
It sounds like it should be a chant.
You're spending the night
All
here?
that cash.
Yes.
All that
May I
cash.
ask where?
At the Butler House.
We could put you up at the motel as our guest.
No, the house is fine.
It would make it easier for us to kill you if you stayed at the
That's very
hotel.
kind of you, but I'm meeting Mr. Butler about some personal items.
You'll want a phone. I can reconnect the line.
Don't trouble, please.
No trouble. You'll need a phone.
Don't want to be stuck out there.
Would be awful
Convinced me.
if someone
Thank you.
broke in and tried to kill you and there was no
By
phone.
the way, have you known Mr. Butler a long time?
No, I've never met him. He called me and asked me if I'd handle this for him. I said yes. He had the key delivered to my office. Mr. Mayor, Sheriff, Mr. Tolman, Miss Howard, see you all tomorrow. In fact, I'm looking forward to it. Slick, really slick.
He's a big lawyer, Bill. You've got to expect that. Don't tell me about lawyers.
Oh, you see the way he looked at us? You see his clothes?
He's doing his job. Just don't tell me about lawyers. You know what I'd like to see? Two of them like that one talking to each other. Neither one of them would know what to believe.
I love you, too. Honey, when I get home, I'm going to have a nice surprise for you.
I have a nice surprise.
I can't
I've
tell
got
you
a
what it is
mistress
It
now.
wouldn't be a surprise, now would it?
You'll like her.
No, I can't come home now, but it'll be very soon. Very soon. Honey, of course I miss you. Yes, I miss Mommy, too. Laura, how are you, kid? So I'll call tomorrow. No, I want to call. I want to talk to Jenny. Yeah, well, as a matter of fact, I'm having a fine time. Well, same to you, darling. What do you mean, hostile?
I was wondering, if we get it, what then?
Tear it down.
Okay. I'd better get going. Do me a favor, Tess. Call Diane, tell her I'm to Wilton, and I'll be back late.
It's fantastic, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. Butler wasn't kidding. Nobody's lived here for years.
That would be such a waste.
It's his grandfather's monument. You know, there's a caretaker who keeps this place just the way he left it.
What kind of monument is this?
Well, that's the trouble. Nobody remembers anymore.
That's what usually happens in America.
I remember this. And he walks with me, and he talks with me, and he tells me I'm his own. And he walks with me, and he talks with me, and he tells me I am.
And now for the musical interlude.
And the joy shared
While someone does the wobbly walk.
You're not serious.
I used to hear that at funerals.
At funerals?
When I was a kid in Chipley, Georgia. There's also Chipley, Florida. But they're both been subsequently eradicated from the map. None other has ever known.
The only thing open was a delicatessen, so I brought you pastrami, salami, potato salad, macaroni, everything you like.
I'll have bologna. And macaroni. No, some of that potato salad. Did you pick the wine, too?
The delicatessen man took a personal interest in its selection.
Oh, well, we got lucky again. That's early 1970. That's hard to come by.
Let's hope it's
Can I
not
have
poisoned.
Of course you may.
Thank you. It must have been wonderful.
What?
The people who lived here. They must have had a wonderful life.
Well, I hope they did. Wilfred Butler must have believed in something. Look at that stone fireplace, parquet floor, the mahogany, this table. And you probably think this place is made of wood, right?
Well,
Wrong. You know what his grandson told me? Underneath that wood, there's 2 feet of stone. The foundation is 8 bricks wide. Now, someday they're going to come in here and they're going to tear this place down and they're going to build little tract houses all over this property on quarter-acre and half-acre lots. And that bulldozer's going to come up that hill toward this house. And it's going to get the surprise of its life. They built a kingdom out here. Only nobody's left.
I mean, if the developer doesn't do a proper survey to find out what's there, then
The rest of us
he
wants
kind
money.
of deserves to lose a bulldozer
He's
to the
asking
foundation.
$50,000 cash for this place, and if the only way he can get, he can get at least $250,000. But he won't take his time, so he'll get screwed.
I mean, isn't that just how life
do you want
goes?
to go upstairs now?
Soon. You know, one of the great pleasures in life is the pleasure of anticipating pleasure, isn't it?
We are very close now, aren't we?
Sure, honey. Very close.
I don't see any beds yet.
Keep looking, honey. Butler said the place is furnished.
Keep looking. Beds are easy to spot. You can find it. Oh, look, all you had to do was turn around.
Yeah, it's furnished.
Meanwhile, in Mayberry.
Anything doing?
No, sir. But look at this.
More football, huh?
Look how they smeared that quarterback. Look at his arm.
Got no time now. Protest. How about that telephone up at the Butler house? Is it working? Well, try it now. I'll wait.
1 ringy ringy. 2 ringy ringy. 3 ringy ringy. Hello.
Oh, yes, Miss Howard. Yeah, the phone's working fine. Very nice of you to call. Thank you. Good night. Honey, I'm going down to the car to get some cigarettes. Be back in a minute.
Okay.
Don't get lonely.
No, no. Did you get your cigarettes?
Yes, I did.
May I have one?
Sure. It's the most amazing things. These cigarettes come in these very small packages these days.
Oh, that's for me?
No, it's for his wife. He just wanted to let you touch it.
Our Christmas is day after tomorrow.
Is that an order?
Yes, ma'am, that's an order.
Damn. Lizzie Borden strikes again. Find the proper verse for moments like these when I've just axe murdered people. Good thing that phone was reconnected.
Sheriff Mason.
Bill, someone's calling from Butler House.
Okay, put him on.
Hello.
Go ahead now.
Mr. Carter?
I'm not Carter.
Who is this?
The honor.
Butler.
I'm worried, Sheriff. Carter's not here.
Speak up, I can't hear you.
I can't. I'm sick. Can you come here?
What is it? What's wrong?
I need to
Carter's
kill
here, but he's
you.
gone. Won't you come?
Okay. Now you stay put in that house.
I'll wait for you. Please, hurry. I'm afraid.
Now take it easy. I'm coming.
Mr. Butler, are you done?
Tess, I have come back.
What's that?
Tess, I want to see you again.
Hello? Who is this?
You know me, Tess. It's Mary Ann. Tell the mayor. Tell them all. I'm waiting in my father's house. Tess, it's so lonesome here. Don't be long.
Hello? 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 Oh, my God, where is everybody?
Hello?
Oh, Maggie, thank goodness.
What is it, Tess?
Something's come up. Something urgent. Can you start early?
Oh, honey, I'm watching TV.
Maggie Daly, you get yourself over here.
What is it?
Just get moving, Maggie. Just please hurry. Come in. It's open.
Okay, mister, that's far enough. What do you want here?
Mayor,
Try again. My father's not home. And don't move.
you want me to put my hands up?
No. Just stay there. What are you staring at?
I seem to remember you from the road.
That's why I'm holding a gun. You scare me.
Well, that makes sense.
Thanks.
Does everybody carry one here?
You can ask the sheriff when he gets here. I'll call him.
I'm sorry to disappoint you, but the sheriff's office is empty.
How do you know?
I was just there.
Who are you?
Jeffrey Butler.
Oh, you're the one who's selling the house.
Yes.
Have you any ID?
Come on.
Don't laugh at me. I want your ID. Some maniac escaped from Margaretville.
Okay.
Put it on the table. Now go back. California license. Lucky you.
Would you like to see my maniac card from the asylum? They give you one when you escape. There's a big scarlet M on it so people won't get confused.
Okay. Look, I'm sorry about the gun. My father's in Wilton getting your money.
All I want to do is to get into my house.
The sheriff's deputy might have a key. He's about the only one I know of.
Well, where's he?
You go down the road about 1.5 miles till you come to a white house with a white fence. And then you can't miss it.
Thanks.
That's okay.
Merry Christmas.
Same to you.
If I don't call back in an hour...
What?
Call the mayor or Mr. Tone and nobody else. Promise me you'll do that.
Well, sure.
Mark it down, honey, so you'll have it.
Sheriff to 301. I'm heading west on Route 5 to Butler House. You'll hear from me. What the hell? What's that light out there?
Hi.
Hi.
Did you find the deputy?
No, I wasn't there.
Oh. I was thinking, isn't your lawyer supposed to be at the house?
The door was locked. His car was there, so I borrowed it.
You mean you stole a car?
Yeah. Keeping it warm.
What if he needs it?
Let him find me. Who's coming to dinner?
Oh, Daddy. We always have dinner every Thursday. Do you want something?
No, I ate Paradise Motel.
Yeah, I know. It's awful. What about a drink?
Yeah.
It's cheap bourbon, but that's a big favorite around here. Do you want ice?
No, straight.
You look tired.
I am tired.
Well, here's to a fast dollar.
Cheers.
Why did you decide to sell the house?
Needed the cash.
After all these years?
I need it now.
Huh. What's it like on the inside? You know, I've never seen the inside. When I was a child, my father told me to stay away from it, or something terrible might happen. Sort of like a haunted house.
I haven't seen it either.
You're going to sell it and you've never seen it?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's too bad. It's about the only place to see around here. Oh, I forgot. Someone keeps calling with a message for my father. She says that she's waiting at your house, in the reception room.
What woman is waiting in my house in the reception room?
Oh, I don't know. It's not a voice that I know.
I better go out there.
Can I come too?
What for?
I'm pushy. I suppose you'll be going back to California soon. California. You said you lived there, remember?
No, I'll be traveling.
Jeff, look. It's the sheriff's car. There's a light. Look at that tombstone. Pretty cheerful.
Who bears the cross shall wear the crown. Wilfred Butler. My grandfather.
Oh.
Someone left their sunglasses in the snow.
They're the sheriff's.
My lawyer's missing. So is the sheriff. You get strange phone calls. And now someone's fascinated by my grandfather's grave.
Let's get out of here.
You still want to go to my house?
Yes. But I don't want to go alone.
Listen.
I'm not nervous.
Well, of course you're not.
Oh, it's the cold. I'm shaking from it. Let's get out of here.
Okay.
We'll get help in town. It's 10 minutes drive.
Good night, Mr. Toman. Have a nice holiday.
Deputy's not here, but Toman is.
Who's Toman?
Come on, you'll see. Mr. Toman, wait. No, please, I have to talk to you. I'm sorry. This is Jeffrey Butler. He's the one who's selling the house. He can't get inside the place. And my father's gone to Wilton. So we wondered...
Anything wrong?
He'll tell us. Tess has gone to his house.
Why would she go there?
I don't know. Anyway, she won't get in. You say it's locked. He says she hates the place.
Would you like to drive there? Diana could stay here, lock herself in.
I need a key.
Oh, man, this isn't my house. It's Tess's. Well, Tess isn't here. Are you satisfied? She must have gone to my place. Well, why wouldn't she go there? She hates it. Maybe she went to see the woman who's there. Someone called the mayor's house before. Said she'd be waiting. What is it?
Hello, Jeff? Hello? Is anybody there? I'm Diane Adams. I spoke to you before.
Bring your father to the house. This is Marianne. Tell him I have the diary. I'm waiting.
Who are you?
He'll know. Christmas Eve, 1935.
Hello? Hello?
Sheriff, I saw your car. Bill? Is that you?
Tess, you can't see me, but I can see you. Oh, yes, I remember that face. You're older now. And fat. But still, Tess. And you're frightened, aren't you? Don't be afraid. I want to help you. Take my hand. Take it, Tess.
1920. The person on the telephone said 1935, Christmas Eve. But that's not the beginning. In 1927, Butler House was restored by Wilfred Butler. After that, I find social notes, parties, nothing special. Then, in 1930, Butler's wife, Catherine, dies of tuberculosis. In August 1933, it starts. Wilfred Butler's daughter is cruelly attacked and raped. Her name is Mary Ann, the same name as the caller who left those messages tonight. She's 15.
Yeah, that was definitely an odd
On May
cut.
2nd, 1934, Mary Ann Butler gives birth to a son, Jeffrey Butler. Jeff. Early in 1935,
But then
Butler
no one
House
accused
is
this
turned
movie
over
of
to
being
a Dr. Robinson
cinematically
as an asylum for mental
sound.
patients. And then Butler goes on to say that he has committed his own daughter. Mary Ann will live at the asylum. There's no end to this story. It's been carefully cut out of all the papers. Why would Toman do that? You scared me. Oh, what happened?
What happened is, Tess has 40 bird cages. Toman is hysterical. Everybody's at my house but me. It's cold outside, and you forgot to lock the door.
Joe, how old are you?
How old am I? You mean, how many years have I lived?
No. There's a lot in the paper about your family.
I don't want to talk about my family.
Wait a minute. There's a woman calling, and she says her name is Mary Ann. That was your mother's name, wasn't it?
My mother died in childbirth. That's when I started traveling.
It's not what the papers say.
What's your point?
I just thought that you should read something for your own good.
Nothing you could tell me about my past or future would be for my own good. Where is the paper?
It's on the table.
It's so stupid to lie. You missed the whole event?
Jeff, maybe your mother's still alive. Maybe she's waiting for you at the house.
I don't know. Come on. No more side trips. Let's go out there.
It's empty. Jeff, look!
Oh, my God! Stay back!
It's Tolman!
Stay back!
He's right. You have to be very specific. You said look, so I looked, and I hit him.
His hands. Somebody cut off his hands.
You killed him. You killed Tolman.
He's asking for help.
You killed him.
Get in the car.
Butler House.
The keys. He took them.
Yes, what?
This is Marianne Butler. I'm calling from my house. Won't you come over here, Mr. Mayor? We're having a reunion. Everyone's here, even your daughter.
It is good to name them, yes. Name them all.
I write this knowing that no one shall ever see it. Not my beloved daughter, or even my grandson, Jeffrey. I write for myself in the hope of forgiveness, if that is still possible. And I write for you, Marianne, whose youth and innocence I have destroyed. By 1935, the doctors had treated my daughter for a year. I had believed they could cure her. The child, Jeffrey, was taken from us and sent to California. I turned my house into an asylum. I brought doctors to live there. I welcomed other patients. Useless. All of it. I remembered what she had been. There was never a lovelier, happier child.
Ladies and gentlemen, now quiet, please. I propose a toast. Doctor, please.
By Christmas of the first year, I knew that I must act, not for myself, but for my helpless child.
Led him to create this institution. Our friend...
I had no plan. All I knew was that I must take her from these men with their promises, their lies.
Shall we? Huh? For he's a jolly good fellow, for he's a jolly good fellow, for he's a jolly good fellow, which nobody can deny, which nobody can deny, which nobody can deny, for he's a jolly good fellow, which nobody can deny.
I knew that they would gorge themselves into a stupor that afternoon. It was their celebration. I expected no less. Since they had come into my house, they had acted as if they owned it. They had behaved like poor relations, half guilty, but finally unable to control their appetites. danced and drank as they usually did. All the time, Robinson would smile and reassure me. They expected me to believe because I had no choice. Wilfred, trust me. He really believed Marianne would be well. He saw a light. There is a light at the end of a long tunnel.
Believe me. There is a light at the end of a long tunnel.
Stay here, Doctor. I'll get more champagne. He was ready. I knew it. Drunk and fat and full of his own importance. I left then.
Yeah, that's one of the things with this movie
My
is
cruelty to Marianne
the
was
whole
inhuman.
setup.
I know that.
Stupid.
I had loved her. I had fathered our child, Jeffrey.
This movie did not
I
need to be
brought
an
her to
hour and
this.
25 minutes long.
But I swear that on that afternoon, all I wanted was to save my child.
But if it was a good movie, we wouldn't be watching it. And hey, we've still got
My
14
hope was
minutes
to get her
left.
away from that house. But also, I wanted to set free those other wretches who had so long been abused by the doctors.
It is a dumb dump. That's what it is.
I knew what they might do if these inmates were freed. And this is my guilt. I knew. And still, I freed them. After the inmates started for the house, I went to get our car to take Marianne away. I do not know exactly when she slipped away from me. I assume that when they saw her in the dining room, the inmates believed her to be part of that household which they hated. And so, they killed her. Later, there was a celebration. And then most of the inmates fled. I don't know where. But I shall never forget what they did to my child. Since that Christmas,
You can't
I have
expect
lived in
anything to make
prisons
sense
and asylums,
or tie together
lived
at this point.
as an animal. I have wandered in bitterness until
This movie
all
should have been
seasons have become
maybe
as
45 minutes long.
and that is a season of vengeance.
Just remember, this movie was made at a time when drugs were prevalent. LSD had to have been involved in this, as it is in so many of the movies we watch on this channel. Because the whole thing is stupid.
Jeff. Jeff.
Wilfred Butler is still alive. This is still his house.
Your grandfather died in 1950. He was burned to death in this house.
My grandfather poured gasoline over a squatter he found here. The town wanted to believe he was dead. They still do. This house was an asylum. There was a massacre by the inmates. Tess, Tolman, the sheriff. Your father.
No.
All inmates. They killed my mother in this room.
Who's that? Who's there?
And now I shoot you with my gun.
Oh no!
Oh no, doesn't seem to be quite enough of a statement there.
Daddy? Daddy?
Diane?
Jeff? Jeff? No. No. Jeff, why? Why? I spent that night weeping. By morning, there were no more tears.
And then I went home and opened the Christmas presents.
They were shooting at killers. But they were simply the last victims in that house of victims.
And that was indeed a movie.
And now, a year later, they will tear down Wilfred Butler's monument. But they can never destroy my memories of what happened here.
But will the bulldozer get stopped by the Foundation, as was predicted in the beginning of the movie? Will the Foundation win? That is what we must know. That is what we are all here for. Alas, we shall be denied that final thing. We don't get to know. All the other random nonsense that was in there. We don't get to know the fate of the bulldozer and the Foundation. It's so sad. So yes, this is the best way to start off Christmas. With horrible, horrible movies. Foundation always wins? Yeah, probably. They should have at least let us see it. That was just rude. It was rude to not let us see it. Well, since I ended up starting the stream much later than I had intended to, and it is now dark. It is now dark, good lord. It is now late. You guys want to hear some reading? Because I thought we might actually get into the actual holiday spirit with some of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. They didn't have the budget to buy a house to actually destroy it. That's probably true. That is probably very true. So I'm going to take a little break. And when I come back, I will begin reading from Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. Hey, Perry. How are you? Okay, we are going to take a quick break. I'm going to roll some ads. Watch them all. I get a whole half a cent from each view. I hope we rolling in the money soon. But no, every time I roll ads, it then makes it so that people that come into the stream don't get the pre-roll ads for 20 minutes. So, I am going to, as I said, take a quick break. Everybody stretch, get your beverages, get your snacks. We are going to do Christmas stories. Something to get rid of that horrible, horrible movie. So I will be back I'm not going to say very soon because I don't know how long of a break, but it won't be more than 5 or 10 minutes. I'm going to say 10 minutes tops, probably less than that. Hello there, and I am back for some reading. I hope that you're all having a good night and that you are all ready for some Christmas. I know I certainly am, and especially after that particular movie, which was definitely not a Christmas movie. Update description, and there we go. Hello, TGB Bennett. Welcome. Glad to have you here with us. Okay, let us now get into our story, which I'm sure is one you all know. Take a drink of some soda. Because the carbonation bubbles are magical. Well, thank you for the follow. Welcome to the Campfire Club. Can you hear the campfire sounds? The fireplace sounds, okay? Have I got the fireplace sounds on? Yes, I've got the fireplace sounds on. So, hopefully you can hear them okay. And hopefully you can hear me okay. So, we shall begin with our story. And this is the original. It says that this is the original version of the story. And I don't know why all of a sudden I'm going to start coughing. So I will try not to do that. Oh good, I'm glad you can hear the fireplace sounds and me. I seem to have issues with my audio sometimes, so hopefully we've got a good balance here. Alright. Stave 1. Marley's Ghost. Marley was dead, to begin with. There is no doubt whatever about that. The register of his burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, and the chief mourner. Scrooge signed it, and Scrooge's name was good upon change for anything he chose to put his hand to. Old Marley was as dead as a doornail. Mind, I don't mean to say that I know of my own knowledge what there is particularly dead about a doornail. I might have been inclined myself to regard a coffin nail as the deadest piece of ironmongery in the trade. But the wisdom of our ancestors is in the simile, and my unhallowed hands shall not disturb it, or the country's done for. You will therefore permit me to repeat emphatically that Marley was as dead as a doornail. Scrooge knew he was dead? Of course he did. How could it be otherwise? Scrooge and he were partners for I don't know how many years. Scrooge was his sole executor, his sole administrator, his sole assign, his sole residuary legatee, his sole friend and sole mourner. And even Scrooge was not so dreadfully cut up by the sad event, but that he was an excellent man of business on the very day of the funeral, and solemnized it with an undoubted bargain. The mention of Marley's funeral brings me back to the point I started from. There is no doubt that Marley was dead. This must be distinctly understood, or nothing wonderful can come of the story I am going to relate. If we were not perfectly convinced that Hamlet's father died before the play began, there will be nothing more remarkable in his taking a stroll at night in an easterly wind upon his own ramparts than there would be in any other middle-aged gentleman rashly turning out after dark in a breezy spot, say St. Paul's churchyard, for instance, literally to astonish his son's weak mind. Well, I hope you have a pleasant sleep and that you have good dreams, and I shall do my best to send you into that sweet slumber. Scrooge never painted out old Marley's name. There it stood, years afterward, above the warehouse door. Scrooge and Marley. The firm was known as Scrooge and Marley. Sometimes people new to the business called Scrooge, and sometimes Marley, but he answered to both names. It was all the same to him. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone. Scrooge, a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner. Hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel had ever struck out generous fire. Secret and self-contained and solitary as an oyster. The cold within him froze his old features, nipped his pointed nose, shriveled his cheeks, stiffened his gait, made his eyes red, his thin lips blue, and spoke out shrewdly in his grating voice. A frosty rime was on his head, and on his eyebrows, and his wiry chin. He carried his own low temperature always about him. He iced his office in the dog days, and didn't thaw it 1 degree at Christmas. External heat and cold had little influence on Scrooge. No warmth could warm, no wintry weather chill him. No wind that blew was bitterer than he. No falling snow was more intent upon its purpose. No pelting rain less open to entreaty. Foul weather didn't know where to have him. The heaviest rain and snow and hail and sleet could boast of the advantage over him in only one respect. They often came down handsomely, and Scrooge never did. Nobody ever stopped him in the street to say with gladsome looks, "My dear Scrooge, how are you? When will you come to see me?" No beggars implored him to bestow a trifle. No children asked him what it was o'clock. No man or woman ever once in all his life inquired the way to such and such a place of Scrooge. Even the blind men's dogs appeared to know him, and when they saw him coming on, would tug their owners into doorways and up courts, and then would wag their tails as though they said, "No eye at all is better than an evil eye, dark master." But what did Scrooge care? It was the very thing he liked. To edge his way along the crowded paths of life, warning all human sympathy to keep its distance, was what the knowing ones called nuts to Scrooge. Once upon a time, of all the good days in the year on Christmas Eve, old Scrooge sat busy in his counting house. It was cold, bleak, biting weather, foggy withal, and he could hear the people in the court outside go wheezing up and down, beating their hands upon their breasts and stamping their feet upon the pavement stones to warm them. The city clocks had only just gone 3, but it was quite dark already. It had not been light all day, and candles were flaring in the windows of the neighboring offices, like ruddy smears upon the palpable brown air. The fog came pouring in at every window of the neighboring The fog came pouring in at every chink and keyhole, and was so dense without that although the court was of the narrowest, the houses opposite were mere phantoms. To see the dingy cloud come drooping down, obscuring everything, one might have thought that nature lived hard by, and was brewing on a large scale. The door of Scrooge's counting house was open, that he might keep his eye upon his clerk, who in a dismal little cell beyond, a sort of tank, was copying letters. Scrooge had a very small fire, but the clerk's fire was so very much smaller that it looked like one coal. But he couldn't replenish it, for Scrooge kept the coal box in his own room, and so surely as the clerk came in with the shovel, the master predicted that it would be necessary for them to part. Wherefore the clerk put on his white comforter and tried to warm himself at the candle, in which effort, not being a man of a strong imagination, he failed. "A Merry Christmas, Uncle. God save you," cried a cheerful voice. It was the voice of Scrooge's nephew, who came upon him so quickly that this was the first intimation he had of his approach. "Bah," said Scrooge. "Humbug." He had so heated himself with rapid walking in the fog and frost, this nephew of Scrooge's, that he was all in a glow. His face was ruddy and handsome, his eyes sparkled, and his breath smoked again. "Christmas a humbug, Uncle," said Scrooge's nephew. "You don't mean that, I am sure." "I do," said Scrooge. "Merry Christmas. What right have you to be merry? What reason have you to be merry? You're poor enough." "Come, then," returned the nephew gaily. "What right have you to be dismal? What reason have you to be morose? You're rich enough." Scrooge, having no better answer ready on the spur of the moment, said "bah" again, and followed it up with "humbug." "Don't be cross, Uncle," said the nephew. "What else can I be?" returned the uncle, "when I live in such a world of fools as this? Merry Christmas. Out upon Merry Christmas. What's Christmas time to you but a time for paying bills without money? A time for finding yourself a year older, but not an hour richer. A time for balancing your books and having every item in them through a round dozen of months presented dead against you. If I could work my will," said Scrooge indignantly, "every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled with his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart. He should." "Uncle," pleaded the nephew. "Nephew," returned the uncle sternly, "keep Christmas in your own way, and let me keep it in mine." "Keep it," repeated Scrooge's nephew. "But you don't keep it." "Let me leave it alone, then," said Scrooge. "Much good may it do you. Much good it has ever done you." "There are many things from which I might have derived good, by which I have not profited, I dare say," returned the nephew. "Christmas among the rest. But I am sure I have always thought of Christmas time, when it has come round, apart from the veneration due to its sacred name and origin, if anything belonging to it can be apart from that, as a good time. A kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant time. The only time I know of, in the long calendar of the year, when men and women seem by one consent to open their shut-up hearts freely, and to think of people below them as if they really were fellow passengers to the grave, and not another race of creatures bound on other journeys. And therefore, Uncle, though it has never put a scrap of gold or silver in my pocket, I believe that it has done me good, and will do me good, and I say God bless it." The clerk in the tank involuntarily applauded. Becoming immediately sensible of the impropriety, he poked the fire and extinguished the last frail spark forever. "Let me hear another sound from you," said Scrooge, "and you'll keep your Christmas by losing your situation. You're quite a powerful speaker, sir," he added, turning to his nephew. "I wonder you don't go into Parliament. Don't be angry, Uncle. Come, dine with us tomorrow." Scrooge said that he would see him. Yes, indeed he did. He went the whole length of the expression, and said that he would see him in that extremity first. "But why?" cried Scrooge's nephew. "Why?" "Why did you get married?" said Scrooge. "Because I fell in love." "Because you fell in love," growled Scrooge, as if that were the only one thing of the world more ridiculous than a Merry Christmas. "Good afternoon." "Nay, Uncle, but you never came to see me before that happened. Why give it as a reason for not coming now?" "Good afternoon," said Scrooge. "I want nothing from you. I ask nothing of you. Why cannot we be friends?" "Good afternoon," said Scrooge. "I am sorry with all my heart to find you so resolute. We have never had any quarrel to which I have been a party. But I have made the trial in homage to Christmas, and I'll keep my Christmas humor to the last. So a Merry Christmas, Uncle. Good afternoon, said Scrooge. And a Happy New Year. Good afternoon, said Scrooge. His nephew left the room without an angry word, notwithstanding. He stopped at the outer door to bestow the greetings of the season on the clerk, who, cold as he was warmer than Scrooge, for he returned them cordially. There's another fellow, muttered Scrooge, who overheard him. My clerk with 15 shillings a week, and a wife and family talking about a Merry Christmas. I'll retire to Bedlam. This lunatic, in letting Scrooge's nephew out, had let 2 other people in. They were portly gentlemen, pleasant to behold, and now stood with their hats off in Scrooge's office. They had books and papers in their hands, and bowed to him. Scrooge and Marley's, I believe, said one of the gentlemen, referring to his list. Have I the pleasure of addressing Mr. Scrooge or Mr. Marley? Mr. Marley has been dead these 7 years, Scrooge replied. He died 7 years ago, this very night. We have no doubt his liberality is well represented by his surviving partner, said the gentleman, presenting his credentials. It certainly was, for they had been 2 kindred spirits. At the ominous word liberality, Scrooge frowned, and shook his head, and handed the credentials back. At this festive season of the year, Mr. Scrooge, said the gentleman, taking up a pen, it is more than usually desirable that we should make some slight provision for the poor and destitute, who suffer greatly at the present time. Many thousands are in want of common necessities. Hundreds of thousands are in want of common comforts, sir. Are there no prisons? Asked Scrooge. Plenty of prisons, said the gentleman, laying down the pen again. And the union workhouses, demanded Scrooge. Are they still in operation? They are, still, returned the gentleman. I wish I could say they were not. The treadmill and the poor law are in full vigor, then, said Scrooge. Both very busy, sir. Oh, I was afraid from what you said at first that something had occurred to stop them in their useful course, said Scrooge. I'm very glad to hear it. Under the impression that they scarcely furnish Christian cheer of mind or body to the multitude, returned the gentleman. A few of us are endeavoring to raise a fund to buy the poor some meat and drink and means of warmth. We choose this time because it is a time of all others when want is keenly felt and abundance rejoices. What shall I put you down for? Nothing, Scrooge replied. You wish to be anonymous. I wish to be left alone, said Scrooge. Since you ask me what I wish, gentlemen, that is my answer. I don't make merry myself at Christmas, and I can't afford to make idle people merry. I help to support the establishments I have mentioned. They cost enough, and those who are badly off must go there. Many can't go there, and many would rather die. If they would rather die, said Scrooge, they had better do it, and decrease the surplus population. Besides, excuse me, I don't know that. But you might know it, observed the gentleman. It's not my business, Scrooge returned. It's enough for a man to understand his own business and not to interfere with other people's. Mine occupies me constantly. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Seeing clearly that it would be useless to pursue their point, the gentleman withdrew. Scrooge resumed his labors with an improved opinion of himself, and in a more facetious temper than was usual with him. Meanwhile the fog and darkness thickened so that people ran about with flaring links, proffering their services to go before horses and carriages and conduct them on their way. The ancient tower of a church, whose gruff old bell was always peeping slyly down at Scrooge out of a Gothic window in the wall, became invisible, and struck the hours and quarters in the clouds, with tremendous vibrations afterwards, as if its teeth were chattering in its frozen head up there. The cold became intense. In the main street, at the corner of the court, Some laborers were repairing the gas pipes, and had lighted a great fire in a brazier, round which a party of ragged men and boys were gathered, warming their hands and winking their eyes before the blaze in rapture. The water plug being left in solitude, its overflowing sullenly congealed and turned to misanthropic ice. The brightness of the shops, where holly sprigs and berries crackled in the lamp heat of the windows, made pale faces ruddy as they passed. Poulterers' and grocers' trades became a splendid joke, a glorious pageant, with which it was next to impossible to believe that such dull principles as bargain and sale had anything to do. The Lord Mayor, in the stronghold of the mighty mansion house, gave orders to his 50 cooks and butlers to keep Christmas as a Lord Mayor's household should, and even the little tailor, whom he had fined 5 shillings on the previous Monday for being drunk and bloodthirsty in the streets, stirred up tomorrow's pudding in his garret, while his lean wife and the baby sallied out to buy the beef. Foggier yet, and colder. Piercing, searching, biting cold. If the good St. Dunstan had but nipped the evil spirit's nose with a touch of such weather as that, instead of using his familiar weapons, then indeed he would have roared to lusty purpose. The owner of one scant young nose, gnawed and mumbled by the hungry cold as bones are gnawed by dogs, stooped down at Scrooge's keyhole to regale him with a Christmas carol. But at the first sound of God rest you merry gentlemen, let nothing you dismay, Scrooge seized the ruler with such energy of action that the singer fled in terror, leaving the keyhole to the fog and even more congenial frost. At length the hour of shutting up the counting-house arrived. With an ill will, Scrooge dismounted from his stool, and tacitly admitted the fact to the expectant clerk in the tank, who instantly snuffed his candle out and put on his hat. "You'll want all day tomorrow, I suppose," said Scrooge. "If quite convenient, sir." "It's not convenient," said Scrooge, "and it's not fair. If I was to stop half a crown for it, you think yourself ill-used, I'll be bound." The clerk smiled faintly. "And yet," said Scrooge, "you don't think me ill-used when I pay a day's wages for no work." The clerk observed that it was only once a year. "A poor excuse for picking a man's pockets every 25th of December," said Scrooge, buttoning his greatcoat to the chin. "But I suppose you must have the whole day. Be here all the earlier next morning." The clerk promised that he would, and Scrooge walked out with a growl. The office was closed in a twinkling, and the clerk, with the long ends of his white comforter dangling below his waist, for he boasted no greatcoat, went down a slide on Cornhill, at the end of a lane of boys, 20 times, in honor of its being Christmas Eve, and then ran home to Camden Town as hard as he could pelt, to play at blind man's buff. Scrooge took his melancholy dinner in his usual melancholy tavern, and having read all the newspapers, and beguiled the rest of the evening with his banker's books, went home to bed. He lived in chambers which had once belonged to his deceased partner. They were a gloomy suite of rooms, in a lowering pile of building up a yard, where it had so little business to be, that one could scarcely help fancying it must have run there when it was a young house, playing at hide-and-seek with other houses and forgotten the way out. It was old enough now, and dreary enough, for nobody lived in it but Scrooge, the other rooms being all let out as offices. The yard was so dark that even Scrooge, who knew its every stone, was fain to grope with his hands. The fog and frost so hung about the black old gateway of the house that it seemed as if the genius of the weather sat in mournful meditation on the threshold. Now, it is a fact that there was nothing at all particular about the knocker on the door, except that it was very large. It is also a fact that Scrooge had seen it night and morning during his whole residence in that place. Also that Scrooge had as little of what is called fancy about him as any man in the city of London, even including, which is a bold word, the corporation, alderman, and livery. Let it also be borne in mind that Scrooge had not bestowed one thought on Marley since his last mention of his 7 years dead partner that afternoon. And then let any man explain to me, if he can, how it happened that Scrooge, having his key in the lock of the door, saw in the knocker, without its undergoing any intermediate process of change, not a knocker, but Marley's face. Marley's face. It was not in impenetrable shadow as the other objects in the yard were, but had a dismal light about it, like a bad lobster in a dark cellar. It was not angry or ferocious, but looked at Scrooge as Marley used to look, with ghostly spectacles turned up on its ghostly forehead. The hair was curiously stirred, as if by breath or hot air, and though the eyes were wide open, they were perfectly motionless. That and its livid color made it horrible, but its horror seemed to be in spite of the face and beyond its control, rather than a part of its own expression. As Scrooge looked fixedly at this phenomenon, it was a knocker again. To say that he was not startled, or that his blood was not conscious of a terrible sensation to which it had been a stranger from infancy, would be untrue. But he put his hand upon the key he had relinquished, turned it sturdily, walked in, and lighted his candle. He did pause, with a moment's resolution, before he shut the door, and he did look cautiously behind it first, as if he half expected to be terrified with the sight of Marley's pigtail sticking out into the hall. But there was nothing on the back of the door except the screws and nuts that held the knocker on. So he said pooh-pooh and closed it with a bang. The sound resounded through the house like thunder. Every room above and every cask in the wine merchant's cellars below appeared to have a separate peal of echoes of its own. Scrooge was not a man to be frightened by echoes. He fastened the door and walked across the hall and up the stairs, slowly, too, trimming his candle as he went. You may talk vaguely about driving a coach and six up a good old flight of stairs, or through a bad young Act of Parliament, but I mean to say you might have got a hearse up that staircase, and taken it broadwise, with the splinter bar towards the wall, and the door towards the balustrades, and done it easy. There was plenty of width for that, and room to spare, which is perhaps the reason why Scrooge thought he saw a locomotive hearse going on before him in the gloom. Half a dozen gas lamps out of the streets wouldn't have lighted the entry too well, so you may suppose that it was pretty dark with Scrooge's dip. Up Scrooge went, not caring a button for that. Darkness is cheap, and Scrooge liked it. But before he shut his heavy door, he walked through his rooms to see that all was right. He had just enough recollection of the face to desire to do that. Sitting room, bedroom, lumber room, all as they should be. Nobody under the table, nobody under the sofa, a small fire in the grate, spoon and basin ready, and the little saucepan of gruel. Scrooge had a cold in his head. Upon the hob. Nobody under the bed, nobody in the closet, nobody in his dressing gown, which was hanging up in a suspicious attitude against the wall. Lumber room as usual. Old fire guard, old shoes, 2 fish baskets, washing stand on 3 legs, and a poker. Quite satisfied, he closed his door and locked himself in, double-locked himself in, which was not his custom. Thus secured against surprise, he took off his cravat, put on his dressing gown and slippers, and his nightcap, and sat down before the fire to take his gruel. It was a very low fire indeed, nothing on such a bitter night. He was obliged to sit close to it and brood over it before he could extract the least sensation of warmth from such a handful of fuel. The fireplace was an old one, built by some Dutch merchant long ago, and paved all around with quaint Dutch tiles, designed to illustrate the scriptures. There were Cains and Abels, Pharaoh's daughters, queens of Sheba, angelic messengers descending through the air on clouds, like feather beds, Abrahams, Belshazzars, apostles putting off to sea in butter boats, hundreds of figures to attract his thoughts. And yet that face of Marley, 7 years dead, came like the ancient prophet's rod and swallowed up the whole. If each smooth tile had been a blank at first, with power to shape some picture on its surface from the disjointed fragments of his thoughts, there would have been a copy of old Marley's head on every one. "Humbug," said Scrooge, and walked across the room. After several turns, he sat down again. As he threw his head back in the chair, his glance happened to rest upon a bell, a disused bell that hung in the room, and communicated for some purpose now forgotten with a chamber in the highest story of the building. It was with great astonishment, and with a strange, inexplicable dread, that as he looked he saw this bell begin to swing. It swung so softly in the outset that it scarcely made a sound, but soon it rang out loudly, and so did every bell in the house. This might have lasted half a minute, or a minute, but it seemed an hour. The bells ceased as they had begun, together. They were succeeded by a clanking noise deep down below, as if some person were dragging a heavy chain over the casks in the wine merchant's cellar. Scrooge then remembered to have heard that ghosts in haunted houses were described as dragging chains. The cellar door flew open with a booming sound, and then he heard the noise much louder on the floors below, then coming up the stairs, then coming straight towards his door. "It's humbug still," said Scrooge. "I won't believe it." His color changed, though, when, without a pause, it came on through the heavy door and passed into the room before his eyes. Upon its coming in, the dying flame leaped up as though it cried, "I know him, Marley's ghost," and fell again. Marley's ghost. The same face. The very same. Marley in his pigtail, usual waistcoat, tights, and boots. The tassels on the latter bristling like his pigtail and his coat skirts, and the hair upon his head. The chain he drew was clasped about his middle. It was long and wound about him like a tail, and it was made, for Scrooge observed it closely, of cash boxes, keys, padlocks, ledgers, deeds, and heavy purses wrought in steel. His body was transparent, so that Scrooge, observing him, and looking through his waistcoat, could see the 2 buttons on his coat behind. Scrooge had often heard it said that Marley had no bowels, but he had never believed it until now. No, nor did he believe it even now. Though he looked the phantom through and through, and saw it standing before him, though he felt the chilling influence of its death-cold eyes, and marked the very texture of the folded kerchief bound about its head and chin, which wrapper he had not observed before, he was still incredulous, and fought against his senses. "How now?" said Scrooge, caustic and cold as ever. "What do you want with me?" "Much," said Marley's voice, no doubt about it. Who are you? Ask me who I was. Who were you then? Said Scrooge, raising his voice. You're particular for a shade. He's going to say, to a shade, but substituted this as more appropriate. In life, I was your partner, Jacob Marley. Can you sit down? Asked Scrooge, looking doubtfully at him. I can. Do it, then. Scrooge asked the question because he didn't know whether a ghost so transparent might find himself in a condition to take a chair, and felt that in the event of its being impossible, it might involve the necessity of an embarrassing explanation. But the ghost sat down on the opposite side of the fireplace, as if he were quite used to it. You don't believe in me, observed the ghost. I don't, said Scrooge. What evidence would you have of my reality beyond that of your senses? I don't know, said Scrooge. Why do you doubt your senses? Because, said Scrooge, a little thing affects them. A slight disorder of the stomach makes them cheats. You may be an undigested bit of beef, a blob of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of an underdone potato. There's more of gravy than of grave about you, whatever you are. Scrooge was not much in the habit of cracking jokes, nor did he feel in his heart by any means waggish then. The truth is that he tried to be smart as a means of distracting his own attention and keeping down his terror, for the spectre's voice disturbed the very marrow in his bones. To sit there, staring at those fixed glazed eyes in silence for a moment, would play, Scrooge felt, the very deuce with him. There was something very awful, too, in the spectre's being provided with an infernal atmosphere of its own. Scrooge could not feel it himself, but this was clearly the case, for though the ghost sat perfectly motionless, its hair and skirts and tassels were still agitated by the hot vapor from an oven. You see this toothpick, said Scrooge, returning quickly to the charge, for the reason just assigned, and wishing, though it were only for a second, to divert the vision's stony gaze from himself. I do, replied the ghost. You are not looking at it, said Scrooge. But I see it, said the ghost, notwithstanding. Well, returned Scrooge, I have but to swallow this, and for the rest of my days persecuted by a legion of goblins, all of my own creation. Humbug, I tell you, humbug. At this the spirit raised a frightful cry, and shook its chain with such a dismal and appalling noise that Scrooge held on tight to his chair, to save himself from falling in a swoon. But how much greater was his horror when the phantom, taking off the bandage round its head, as if it were too warm to wear inside, its lower jaw dropped down upon its breast. Scrooge fell upon his knees and clasped his hands before his face. Mercy, he said, dreadful apparition, why do you trouble me? Man of the worldly mind, replied the ghost, do you believe in me or not? I do, said Scrooge. I must. But why do spirits walk the earth, and why do they come to me? It is required of every man, the ghost returned, that the spirit within him should walk abroad among his fellow men, and travel far and wide, and if that spirit goes not forth in life, it is condemned to do so after death. It is doomed to wander through the world, oh, woe is me, and witness what it cannot share, but might have shared on earth and turned it to happiness. Again the spectre raised a cry and shook its chains and wrung its shadowy hands. You are fettered, said Scrooge, trembling. Tell me why. I wear the chain I forged in life, replied the ghost. I made it link by link and yard by yard. I girded it on of my own free will, and of my own free will I wore it. Is its pattern strange to you?" Scrooge trembled more and more. "Or would you know," pursued the ghost, "the weight and length of the strong coil you bear yourself? It was full as heavy and as long as this 7 Christmas Eves ago. You have labored on it since. It is a ponderous chain." Scrooge glanced about him on the floor, in the expectation of finding himself surrounded by some 50 or 60 fathoms of iron cable, but he could see nothing. "Jacob," he said imploringly. "Old Jacob Barley, tell me more. Speak comfort to me, Jacob." "I have none to give," the ghost replied. "It comes from other regions, Ebenezer Scrooge, and is conveyed by other ministers to other kinds of men. Nor can I tell you what I would. A very little more is all permitted to me. I cannot rest. I cannot stay. I cannot linger anywhere. My spirit never walked beyond our counting house. Mark me. In life, my spirit never roved beyond the narrow limits of our money-changing hole, and weary journeys lie before me." It was a habit with Scrooge, whenever he became thoughtful, to put his hands in his breeches pockets. Pondering on what the ghost had said, he did so now, but without lifting up his eyes or getting off his knees. "You must have been very slow about it, Jacob," Scrooge observed, in a businesslike manner, though with humility and deference. "Slow," the ghost repeated. 7 years dead," mused Scrooge, "and traveling all the time." "The whole time," said the ghost. "No rest, no peace, incessant torture of remorse." "You travel fast," said Scrooge. "On the wings of the wind," replied the ghost. "You might have got over a great quantity of ground in 7 years," said Scrooge. The ghost, on hearing this, set up another cry, and clanked its chain so hideously in the dead silence of the night that the ward would have been justified in indicting it for a nuisance. "Oh, captive, bound, and double ironed," cried the phantom, "not to know that ages of incessant labor by immortal creatures, for this earth must pass into eternity before the good of which it is susceptible is all developed. Not to know that any Christian spirit working kindly in its little sphere, whatever it may be, will find its mortal life too short for its vast means of usefulness. Not to know that no space of regret can make amends for one's life opportunity misused. Yet such was I. Oh, such was I." "But you were always a good man of business, Jacob," faltered Scrooge, who now began to apply this to himself. "Business!" cried the ghost, wringing its hands again. "Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, and benevolence were all my business. The dealings of my trade were but a drop of water in the comprehensive ocean of my business." It held up its chain at arm's length, as if that were the cause of all its unavailing grief, and flung it heavily upon the ground again. "At this time of the rolling year," the spectre said, "I suffer most. Why did I walk through crowds of fellow beings with my eyes turned down, and never raise them to that blessed star which led the wise men to a poor abode? Were there no poor homes to which its light would have conducted me?" Scrooge was very much dismayed to hear the spectre going on at this rate, and began to quake exceedingly. "Hear me," cried the ghost. "My time is nearly gone." "I will," said Scrooge. "But don't be hard upon me. Don't be flowery, Jacob, pray. How is it that I appear before you in a shape that you can see, I may not tell? I have sat invisible beside you many and many a day. It was not an agreeable idea. Scrooge shivered and wiped the perspiration from his brow. "That is no light part of my penance," pursued the ghost. "I am here tonight to warn you that you have yet a chance and hope of escaping my fate. A chance and hope of my procuring Ebenezer." "You were always a good friend to me," said Scrooge. "Thank ye." "You will be haunted," resumed the ghost, "by 3 spirits." Scrooge's countenance fell almost as low as the ghost's had done. "Is that the chance and hope you mentioned, Jacob?" he demanded in a faltering voice. "It is." I think I'd rather not," said Scrooge. "Without their visits," said the ghost, "you cannot hope to shun the path I tread. Expect the first tomorrow, when the bell tolls 1. "Couldn't I take 'em all at once and have it over, Jacob?" hinted Scrooge. "Expect the second on the next night at the same hour. The third upon the next night, when the last stroke of 12 has ceased to vibrate. Look to see me no more, and look that, for your own sake, you remember what has passed between us." When it had said these words, the spectre took its wrapper from the table and bound it round its head as before. Scrooge knew this by the smart sound its teeth made, when the jaws were brought together by the bandage. He ventured to raise his eyes again, and found his supernatural visitor confronting him in an erect attitude, with its chain wound over and about its arm. The apparition walked backwards from him, and at every step it took, the window raised itself a little, so that when the spectre reached it, it was wide open. It beckoned Scrooge to approach, which he did. When they were within 2 paces of each other, Marley's ghost held up its hand, warning him to come no nearer. Scrooge stopped. Not so much in obedience as in surprise and fear, for on the raising of the hand he became sensible of confused noises in the air, incoherent sounds of lamentation and regret, wailings inexpressibly sorrowful and self-accusatory. The spectre, after listening for a moment, joined in the mournful dirge, and floated out upon the bleak, dark night. Scrooge followed to the window, desperate in his curiosity. He looked out. The air was filled with phantoms, wandering hither and thither in restless haste, and moaning as they went. Every one of them wore chains like Marley's ghost. Some few, they might be guilty governments, were linked together. None were free. Many had been personally known to Scrooge in their lives. He had been quite familiar with one old ghost, in a white waistcoat with a monstrous iron safe attached to its ankle, who cried piteously at being unable to assist a wretched woman with an infant, whom it saw below upon a doorstep. The misery with them all was, clearly, that they sought to interfere for good in human matters, and had lost the power forever. Whether these creatures faded into mist, or mist enshrouded them, he could not tell. But they and their spirit voices faded together, and the night became as it had been when he walked home. Scrooge closed the window and examined the door by which the ghost had entered. It was double-locked, as he had locked it with his own hands, and the bolts were undisturbed. He tried to say humbug, but stopped at the first syllable. And being from the emotion he had undergone, or the fatigues of the day, or his glimpse of the invisible world, or the dull conversation of the ghost, or the lateness of an hour, much in need of repose, went straight to bed, without undressing, and fell asleep upon the instant. Stave 2, the first of the three spirits. When Scrooge woke, it was so dark that looking out of bed he could scarcely distinguish the transparent window from the opaque walls of his chamber. He was endeavoring to pierce the darkness with his ferret eyes when the chimes of a neighboring church struck the 4 quarters, so he listened for the hour. To his great astonishment, the heavy bell went on from 6 to 7, and from 7 to 8, and regularly up to 12, then stopped. 12? It was past 2 when he went to bed. The clock was wrong. An icicle must have got into the works. 12. He touched the spring of his repeater to correct this most preposterous clock. Its rapid little pulse beat 12. And stopped. Why, it isn't possible, said Scrooge, that I can have slept through a whole day and far into another night. It isn't possible that anything has happened to the sun, and this is 12 at noon. The idea being an alarming one, he scrambled out of bed and groped his way to the window. He was obliged to rub the frost off with the sleeve of his dressing gown before he could see anything, and could see very little then. All he could make out was that it was still very foggy and extremely cold, and that there was no noise of people running to and fro and making a great stir, as there unquestionably would have been if night had beaten off bright day and taken possession of the world. This was a great relief, because 3 days after sight of this first of exchange, pay to Mr. Ebenezer Scrooge or his order, and so forth, would have been a mere United States security if there were no days to count by. Scrooge went to bed again, and thought, and thought, and thought it over and over and over, and could make nothing of it. The more he thought, the more perplexed he was, and the more he endeavored not to think, the more he thought. Marley's ghost bothered him exceedingly. Every time he resolved within himself, after mature inquiry, that it was all a dream, his mind flew back again, like a strong spring released to its first position, and presented the same problem to be worked all through. Was it a dream or not? Scrooge lay in this state until the chime had gone 3 quarters more, when he remembered on a sudden that the ghost had warned him of a visitation when the bell tolled 1. He resolved to lie awake until the hour was past, and considering that he could no more go to sleep than go to heaven, this was perhaps the wisest resolution in his power. The quarter was so long that he was more than once convinced he must have sunk into a doze unconsciously, and missed the clock. At length it broke upon his listening ear. Ding dong. 1/4 past, said Scrooge, counting. Ding dong. 1/2 past, said Scrooge. Ding dong. 1/4 to it, said Scrooge. Ding dong. The hour itself, said Scrooge triumphantly, and nothing else. He spoke before the hour bell sounded, which it now did with a deep, dull, hollow, melancholy 1. Light flashed up in the room upon the instant, and the curtains of his bed were drawn. The curtains of his bed were drawn aside, I tell you, by a hand. Not the curtains at his feet, nor the curtains at his back, but those to which his face was addressed. The curtains of his bed were drawn aside, and Scrooge, starting up into a half-recumbent attitude, found himself face to face with the unearthly visitor who drew them, as close to it as I am now to you, and I am standing in the spirit at your elbow. It was a strange figure, like a child, yet not so like a child as like an old man, viewed through some supernatural medium, which gave him the appearance of having receded from the view and being diminished to a child's proportions. Its hair, which hung about its neck and down its back, was white as if with age, and yet the face had not a wrinkle in it, and the tenderest bloom was on its skin. The arms were very long and muscular, the hands the same, as if its hold were of uncommon strength. Its legs and feet were delicately formed, were like those upper membranes, bare. It wore a tunic of the purest white, and round its waist was bound a lustrous belt, the sheen of which was beautiful. It held a branch of fresh green holly in its hand, and in singular contradiction of that wintry emblem, had its dress trimmed with summer flowers. But the strangest thing about it was that from the crown of its head there sprung a bright, clear jet of light, by which all was visible, and which was doubtless the occasion of its using, in its duller moments, a great extinguisher for a cap, which it now held under its arm. Even this, though, when Scrooge looked at it with increasing steadiness, was not its strangest quality. For as its belt sparkled and glittered now in one part and now in another, and what was light one instant at another time was dark, so the figure itself fluctuated in its distinctness, being now a thing with one arm, now with one leg, now with 20 legs, now a pair of legs without a head, now a head without a body, of which dissolving parts no outline would be visible in the dense gloom wherein they melted away. And in the very wonder of this, it would be itself again, distinct and clear as ever. "Are you the spirit, sir, whose coming was foretold to me?" asked Scrooge. "I am." The voice was soft and gentle, singularly low, as if instead of being so close beside him, it were at a distance. "Who and what are you?" Scrooge demanded. "I am the ghost of Christmas past." "Long past?" inquired Scrooge, observant of its dwarfish stature. "No, your past." Perhaps Scrooge could not have told anybody why, if anybody could have asked him, but he had a special desire to see the spirit in his cap, and begged him to be covered. "What?" exclaimed the ghost. "Would you so soon put out with worldly hands the light I give? Is it not enough that you are one of those whose passions made this cap, and force me through the whole trains of year to wear it low upon my brow?" Scrooge reverently disclaimed all intention to offend, or any knowledge of having wilfully bonneted the spirit at any period of his life. He then made bold to inquire what business brought him there. "Your welfare," said the ghost. Scrooge expressed himself much obliged, but could not help thinking that a night of unbroken rest would have been more conducive to that end. The spirit must have heard him thinking, for it said immediately, "Your reclamation, then. Take heed." It put out its strong hand as it spoke, and clasped him gently by the arm. "Rise and walk with me." It would have been in vain for Scrooge to plead that the weather and the hour were not adapted to pedestrian purposes, that bed was warm and the thermometer a long way below freezing, that he was clad but lightly in his slippers, dressing gown, and nightcap, and that he had a cold upon him at that time. The grasp, though gentle as a woman's hand, was not to be resisted. He rose, but finding that the spirit made towards the window, clasped his robe in supplication. "I am a mortal," Scrooge remonstrated, "and liable to fall." "Bear but a touch of my hand there," said the spirit, laying it upon his heart, "and you shall be upheld in more than this." As the words were spoken, they passed through the wall, and stood upon an open country road, with fields on either hand. The city was entirely vanished. Not a vestige of it was to be seen. The darkness and the mist had vanished with it, for it was a clear, cold, wintry day with snow upon the ground. "Good heavens," said Scrooge, clasping his hands together as he looked about him. "I was bred in this place. I was a boy here." The spirit gazed upon him mildly. Its gentle touch, though it had been light and instantaneous, appeared still present to the old man's sense of feeling. He was conscious of 1,000 odors floating in the air, each one connected with 1,000 thoughts, and hopes and joys and cares long, long forgotten. "Your lip is trembling," said the ghost. "And what is that upon your cheek?" Scrooge muttered, with an unusual catching in his voice. It was a pimple, and begged the ghost to lead him where he would. "You recollect the way?" inquired the spirit. "Remember it!" cried Scrooge, with fervor. "I could walk it blindfold." "Strange to have forgotten it for so many years," observed the ghost. "Let us go on." They walked along the road, Scrooge recognizing every gate and post and tree, until a little market town appeared in the distance, with its bridge, its church, and winding river. Some shaggy ponies now were seen trotting towards them with boys upon their backs, who called to each other, to other boys in country gigs and carts, driven by farmers. All these boys were in great spirits, and shouted to each other until the broad fields were so full of merry music that the crisp air laughed to hear it. "These are but shadows of the things that have been," said the ghost. "They have no consciousness of us." The jocund travelers came on, and as they came, Scrooge knew and named them every one. Why was he rejoiced beyond all bounds to see them? Why did his cold eye glisten and his heart leap up as they went past? Why was he filled with gladness when he heard them give each other Merry Christmas, as they parted at crossroads and byways for their several homes? What was Merry Christmas to Scrooge? Out upon Merry Christmas! What good had it ever done to him? "The school is not quite deserted," said the ghost. "A solitary child, neglected by his friends, is left there still." Scrooge said he knew it, and he sobbed. They left the high road by a well-remembered lane, and soon approached a mansion of dull red brick, with a little weathercock-surmounted cupola on the roof and a bell hanging in it. It was a large house, but one of broken fortunes, for the spacious offices were still used. Their walls were damp and mossy, their windows broken, and their gates decayed. Fowls clucked and strutted in the stables, and the coach-houses and sheds were overrun with grass. Nor was it more retentive of its ancient state within, for entering the dreary hall and glancing through the open doors of many rooms, they found them poorly furnished, cold, and vast. There was an earthly savor in the air, a chilly bareness in the place which associated itself somehow with too much getting up by candlelight, and not too much to eat. They went, the ghost and Scrooge, across the hall, to a door at the back of the house. It opened before them, and disclosed a long, bare, melancholy room, made barer still by lines of plain deal forms and desks. At one of these a lonely boy was reading near the feeble fire, and Scrooge sat down upon a form and wept to see his poor forgotten self as he used to be. Not a latent echo in the house, not a squeak and scuffle from the mice behind the paneling, not a drip from the half-thawed water-spout in the dull yard behind, not a sigh among the leafless boughs of one despondent poplar, not the idle swinging of an empty storehouse door. No, not a clicking in the fire, but fell upon the heart of Scrooge with softening influence, and gave a freer passage to his tears. The spirit touched him on the arm, and pointed to his younger self, intent upon his reading. Suddenly a man in foreign garments, wonderfully real and distinct to look at, stood outside the window, with an axe stuck in his belt, and leading by the bridle an ass laden with wood. "Why, it's Ali Baba!" Scrooge exclaimed in ecstasy. "It's dear old honest Ali Baba. Yes, yes, I know. One Christmas time, when yonder solitary child was left here all alone, he did come, for the first time, just like that. Poor boy. And Valentine," said Scrooge, "and his wild brother Orson, there they go. And what's his name, who is put down in his drawers asleep at the gates of Damascus? Don't you see him? And the Sultan's groom turned upside down by the Jinnah. There he is upon his head. Serve him right. I'm glad of it. What business had he to be married to the princess?" And to hear Scrooge expending all the earnestness of his nature on such subjects in a most extraordinary voice between laughing and crying, and to see his heightened and excited face, would have been a surprise to his business friends in the city indeed. "There's the parrot," cried Scrooge. "Green body and yellow tail, with a thing like a lettuce growing out of the top of his head. There he is. Poor Robin Crusoe, he called him, when he came home again after sailing round the island. Poor Robin Crusoe. Where have you been, Robin Crusoe?" The man thought he was dreaming, but he wasn't. It was the parrot, you know. There goes Friday, running for his life to the little creek. Halloa, hoop, halloo. Then, with a rapidity of transition very foreign to his usual character, he said, in pity for his former self, "Poor boy," and cried again. "I wish," Scrooge muttered, putting his hand in his pocket and looking around him after drying his eyes with his cuff. "But it's too late now." "What is the matter?" asked the spirit. "Nothing," said Scrooge. "Nothing. There was a boy singing a Christmas carol at my door last night. I should like to have given him something. That's all." The ghost smiled thoughtfully and waved its hand, saying as it did so, "Let us see another Christmas." Scrooge's former self grew larger at the words, and the room became a little darker and more dirty. The panels shrunk, the windows cracked, fragments of plaster fell out of the ceiling, and the naked laths were shown instead. But how all this was brought about, Scrooge knew no more than you do. He only knew that it was quite correct, that everything had happened so, that there he was, alone again, when all the other boys had gone home for the jolly holidays. He was not reading now, but walking up and down despairingly. Scrooge looked at the ghost, and with a mournful shaking of his head, glanced anxiously towards the door. It opened, and a little girl, much younger than the boy, came darting in, and putting her hands around his neck and often kissing him, addressed him as her dear, dear brother. "I have come to bring you home, dear brother," said the child, clapping her tiny hands and bending down to laugh. "To bring you home, home, home." "Home, little Fan?" returned the boy. "Yes," said the child, brimful of glee. "Home for good and all. Home for ever and ever. Father is so much kinder than he used to be, that home's like heaven. He spoke so gently to me one dear night when I was going to bed, that I was not afraid to ask him once more if you might come home. And he said yes, you should, and sent me in a coach to bring you. And you are to be a man," said the child, opening her eyes, "and are never to come back here. But first we're to be together all the Christmas long, and have the merriest time in all the world." "You are quite a woman, little Fan," exclaimed the boy. She clapped her hands and laughed, and tried to touch his head, but being too little, laughed again, and stood on tiptoe to embrace him. Then she began to drag him, in her childish eagerness, towards the door, and he, nothing loth to go, accompanied her. A terrible voice in the hall cried, "Bring down Master Scrooge's box, there!" And in the hall appeared the schoolmaster himself, who glared on Master Scrooge with a ferocious condescension, and threw him into a dreadful state of mind by shaking hands with him. He then conveyed him and his sister into the veriest old well of a shivering best parlor that ever was seen, where the maps upon the wall and the celestial and terrestrial globes in the windows were waxy with cold. Here he produced a decanter of curiously light wine and a block of curiously heavy cake, and administered installments of those dainties to the young people, at the same time sending out a meager servant to offer a glass of something to the postboy, who answered that he thanked the gentleman, but if it was from the same tap as he had tasted before, he had rather not. Master Scrooge's trunk being by this time tied on the top of the chaise, the children bade the schoolmaster good night right wilfully, and getting into it, drove gaily down the garden sweep, the quick wheels dashing the hoar-frost and snow from off the dark leaves of the evergreens like spray. Always a delicate creature whom a breath might have withered, said the ghost. But she had a large heart. So she had, cried Scrooge. You're right. I will not gainsay it, Spirit. God forbid. She died a woman, said the ghost, and had, as I think, children. One child, Scrooge returned. True, said the ghost. Your nephew. Scrooge seemed uneasy in his mind, and answered briefly, Yes. Although they had but that moment left the school behind them, they were now in the busy thoroughfares of a city, where shadowy passengers passed and repassed, where shadowy carts and coaches battled for the way, and all the strife and tumult of a real city were. It was made plain enough by the dressing of the shops that here too it was Christmas time again, but it was evening and the streets were lighted up. The ghost stopped at a certain warehouse door and asked Scrooge if he knew it. Know it, said Scrooge. Was I apprenticed here? They went in. At sight of an old gentleman in a Welsh wig sitting behind such a high desk that if he had been 2 inches taller he might have knocked his head against the ceiling, Scrooge cried in great excitement, Why, it's old Fezziwig. Bless his heart, it's Fezziwig alive again. Old Fezziwig laid down his pen and looked up at the clock, which pointed to the hour of 7. He rubbed his hands, adjusted his capacious waistcoat, laughed all over himself, from his shoes to his organ of benevolence, and called out in a comfortable, oily, rich, fat, jovial voice, Yo-ho there, Ebenezer, Dick. Scrooge's former self, now grown a young man, came briskly in, accompanied by his fellow apprentice. Dick Wilkins, to be sure, said Scrooge to the ghost. Bless me, yes, there he is. He was very much attached to me, was poor Dick. Yo, my boys, said Fezziwig. No more work tonight. Christmas Eve, Dick. Christmas, Ebenezer. Let's have the shutters up, cried old Fezziwig with a sharp clap of his hands, before a man can say Jack Robinson. You wouldn't believe how those fellows went at it. They charged into the street with the shutters, 1, 2, 3, had 'em up in their places, 4, 5, 6, barred 'em and pinned 'em, 7, 8, 9, and came back before you could have got to 12, panting like racehorses. Hilly-ho, cried old Fezziwig, skipping down from the high desk with wonderful agility. Clear away, my lads, and let's have lots of room here. Hilly-ho, Dick. Cheer up, Ebenezer. Clear away. There was nothing they wouldn't have cleared away, or couldn't have cleared away, with old Fezziwig looking on. It was done in a minute. Every movable was packed off as if it were dismissed from public life for evermore. The floor was swept and watered, the lamps were trimmed, fuel was heaped upon the fire, and the warehouse was as snug, warm, and dry, and bright a ballroom as you could desire to see upon a winter's night. In came a fiddler with a music book, and went up to the lofty desk and made an orchestra of it, and tuned like 50 stomach aches. In came Mrs. Fezziwig, one vast, substantial smile. In came the 3 Miss Fezziwigs, beaming and lovable. In came the 6 young followers whose hearts they broke. In came all the young men and women employed in the business. In came the housemaid with her cousin the baker. In came the cook with her brother's particular friend the milkman. In came the boy from over the way, who was suspected of not having board enough from his master, trying to hide himself behind the girl from next door, but one who was proved to have had her ears pulled by her mistress. In they all came, one after another, some shyly, some boldly, some gracefully, some awkwardly, some pushing, some pulling. In they all came, anyhow and everyhow. Away they all went, 20 couples at once, hands half round and back again the other way, down the middle and up again, round and round in various stages of affectionate grouping. Old top couples always turning up in the wrong place, new top couples starting off again as soon as they got there. All top couples at last, and not a bottom one to help them. When this result was brought about, old Fezziwig clapped his hands to stop the dance, cried out, "Well done," and the fiddler plunged his hot face into a pot of porter, especially provided for that purpose. But scorning rest upon his reappearance, he instantly began again, though there were no dancers yet, as if the other fiddler had been carried home, exhausted, on a shutter, and he were a brand new man, resolved to beat him out of sight or perish. Hi, Timbite. How are you tonight? I'm glad you could join us. There were more dances, and there were forfeits, and more dances, and there was cake, and there was negus, and there was a great piece of cold roast, and there was a great piece of cold boiled, and there were mince pies and plenty of beer. But the great effect of the evening came upon the roast and boiled, when the fiddler, an artful dog, mind, the sort of man who knew his business better than you or I could have told it to him, struck up Sir Roger de Coverley. Then old Fezziwig stood out to dance with Mrs. Fezziwig. Top couple, too, with a good stiff piece of work cut out for them. 3 or 4 and 20 pair of partners. People who were not to be trifled with. People who would dance and had no motion of walking. But if they had been twice as many, 4 times, old Fezziwig would have been a match for them, and so would Mrs. Fezziwig. As to her, she was worthy to be his partner in every sense of the term. If that's not high praise, tell me higher, and I'll use it. A positive light appeared to issue from Fezziwig's calves. They shone in every part of the dance like moons. You couldn't have predicted, at any given time, what would have become of them next. And when old Fezziwig and Mrs. Fezziwig had gone all through the dance, advance and retire, both hands to your partner, bow and curtsy, corkscrew, thread the needle, and back again to your place, Fezziwig cut so deftly that he appeared to wink with his legs, and came upon his feet again without a stagger. When the clock struck 11, this domestic ball broke up. Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig took their stations, one on either side of the door, and shaking hands with every person individually as he or she went out, wished him or her a Merry Christmas. When everybody had retired but the 2 prentices, they did the same to them, and thus the cheerful voices died away, and the lads were left to their beds, which were under a counter in the back shop. During the whole of this time, Scrooge had acted like a man out of his wits. His heart and soul were in the scene, and with his former self. He corroborated everything, remembered everything, enjoyed everything, and underwent the strangest agitation. It was not until now, when the bright faces of his former self and Dick were turned upon them, that he remembered the ghost, and became conscious that it was looking full upon him, while the light upon its head burnt very clear. "A small matter," said the ghost, "to make these silly folks so full of gratitude." "Small," echoed Scrooge. The spirit signed to him to listen to the 2 apprentices, who were pouring out their hearts in praise of Fezziwig, and when he had done so, said, "Why, is it not? He has spent but a few pounds of your mortal money. 3 or 4, maybe. Is that so much that he deserves this praise?" "It isn't that," said Scrooge, heated by the remark, and speaking unconsciously like his former, not his latter self. "It isn't that, spirit. He has the power to render us happy or unhappy, to make our service light or burdensome, a pleasure or a toil. Say that his power lies in words and looks. in things so slight and insignificant that it is impossible to add and count 'em up. What then? The happiness he gives is quite as great as if it cost a fortune. He felt the spirit's glance and stopped. What is the matter? Asked the ghost. Nothing particular, said Scrooge. Something, I think, the ghost insisted. No, said Scrooge. No, I should like to be able to say a word or two to my clerk just now, that's all. His former self turned down the lamps as he gave utterance to the wish, and Scrooge and the ghost again stood side by side in the open air. My time grows short, observed the spirit. Quick. This was not addressed to Scrooge or to anyone whom he could see, but it produced an immediate effect. For again Scrooge saw himself. He was older now, a man in the prime of his life. His face had not the harsh and rigid lines of later years, but it had begun to wear the signs of care and avarice. There was an eager, greedy, restless motion in the eye, which showed the passion that had taken root, and where the shadow of the growing tree would fall. He was not alone, but sat by the side of a fair young girl in a mourning dress, in whose eyes there were tears, which sparkled in the light that shone out from the ghost of Christmas past. It matters little, she said softly. To you, very little. Another idol has displaced me. If it can share and comfort you in time to come, as I would have tried to do, I have no just cause to grieve. What idol has displaced you? He rejoined. A golden one. This is the even-handing dealing of the world, he said. There is nothing on which it is so hard as poverty, and there is nothing it professes to condemn with such severity as the pursuit of wealth. You fear the world too much, she answered gently. All your other hopes have merged into the hope of being beyond the chance of its sordid reproach. I have seen your nobler aspirations fall off one by one until the master passion, gain, engrosses you. Have I not? What then? He retorted. Even if I have grown so much wiser, what then? I am not changed towards you. She shook her head. Am I? Our contract is an old one. It was made when we were both poor and content to be so, until in good season we could improve our worldly fortune by our patient industry. You are changed. When it was made, you were another man. I was a boy, he said impatiently. Your own feeling tells you that you were not what you are, she returned. I am. That which keenly promised happiness when we were one in heart is fraught with misery now that we are two. How often I have thought of this, I will not say. It is enough that I have thought of it and can release you. Have I ever sought release? In words, no, never. In what then? In a changed nature, in an altered spirit, in another atmosphere of life, another hope as its great end, in everything that made my love of any worth or value in your sight. If this had never been between us, said the girl, looking mildly, but with steadiness upon him, tell me, would you seek me out and try to win me now? No. He seemed to yield to the justice of this supposition in spite of himself. But he said with a struggle, You think not. I would gladly think otherwise if I could, she answered. Heaven knows. When I have learned a truth like this, I know how strong and irresistible it must be. But if you were free today, tomorrow, yesterday, can even I believe that you would choose a dowerless girl? You who, in your very confidence with her, weigh everything by gain, or choosing her, if for a moment you were false enough to your one guiding principle to do so, do I not know that your repentance and regret would surely follow? I do. And I release you. with a full heart for the love of him you once were. He was about to speak, but with her head turned from him, she resumed. You may. The memory of what is past half makes me hope you will have pain in this. A very, very brief time, and you will dismiss the recollection of it gladly as an unprofitable dream from which it happened well that you awoke. May you be happy in the life you have chosen. She left him, and they parted. Spirit, cried Scrooge, show me no more. Conduct me home. Why do you delight to torture me? One shadow more, exclaimed the ghost. No more, cried Scrooge. No more. I don't wish to see it. Show me no more. But the relentless ghost pinioned him in both his arms and forced him to observe what happened next. They were in another scene and place. A room, not very large or handsome, but full of comfort. Near to the winter fire sat a beautiful young girl, so like that last that Scrooge believed it was the same, until he saw her, now a comely matron, sitting opposite her daughter. The noise in this room was perfectly tumultuous, for there were more children there than Scrooge in his agitated state of mind could count. And unlike the celebrated herd in the poem, there were not 40 children conducting themselves like one, but every child was conducting itself like 40. The consequences were uproarious beyond belief, but no one seemed to care. On the contrary, the mother and daughter laughed heartily, and enjoyed it very much, and the latter, soon beginning to mingle in the sports, got pillaged by the young brigands most ruthlessly. What would I not have given to be one of them? Though I never could have been so rude. No. I wouldn't for the wealth of all the world have crushed that braided hair and torn it down, and for the precious little shoe I wouldn't have plucked it off. God bless my soul to save my life. As to measuring her waist in sport, as they did, bold young brood, I couldn't have done it. I should have expected my arm to have grown round it for a punishment, and never come straight again. And yet I should have dearly liked, I own, to have touched her lips, to have questioned her, that she might have opened them, to have looked upon the lashes of her downcast eyes, and never raised a blush, to have let loose waves of hair, an inch of which would be a keepsake beyond price. In short, I should have liked, I do confess, to have had the highest license of a child, and yet to have been man enough to know its value. But now a knocking at the door was heard, and such a rush immediately ensued that she was laughing face and plundering dress was borne towards it in the center of a flushed and boisterous group, just in time to greet the father, who came home attended by a man laden with Christmas toys and presents. Then the shouting and the struggling, and the onslaught that was made on the defenseless porter. The scaling him with chairs for ladders to dive into his pockets, to spoil him of brown paper parcels, hold on tight by his cravat, hug him round his neck, pommel his back, and kick his legs in irrepressible affection. The shouts of wonder and delight with which the development of every package was received. The terrible announcement that the baby had been taken in the act of putting a doll's frying pan into his mouth, and was more than suspected of having swallowed a fictitious turkey glued on a wooden platter. The immense relief of finding this a false alarm. The joy and gratitude and ecstasy. They are all indescribable alike. It is enough that by degrees the children and their emotions got out of the parlor, and by one stair at a time up to the top of the house, where they went to bed, and so subsided. And now Scrooge looked more attentively than ever, when the master of the house, having his daughter leaning fondly on him, sat down with her and her mother at his own fireside. And when he thought that such another creature, quite as graceful and as full of promise, might have called him father, and been a springtime in the haggard winter of his life, his sight grew very dim indeed. Belle, said the husband, turning to his wife with a smile, I saw an old friend of yours this afternoon. Who was it? Guess. How can I? I don't know, she added in the same breath, laughing as he laughed. Mr. Scrooge. Mr. Scrooge it was. I passed his office window, as it was not shut up, and he had a candle inside. I could scarcely help seeing him. His partner lies upon the point of death, I hear, and there he sat alone. Quite alone in the world, I do believe. Spirit, said Scrooge in a broken voice, remove me from this place. I told you these were shadows of the things that have been, said the ghost. That they are what they are. Do not blame me. Remove me, Scrooge exclaimed. I cannot bear it. He turned upon the ghost, and seeing that it looked upon him with a face in which in some strange way there were fragments of all the faces it had shown him, wrestled with it. Leave me, take me back, haunt me no longer. In this struggle, if that can be called a struggle, in which the ghost, with no visible resistance on its own part, was undisturbed by any effort of its adversary, Scrooge observed that its light was burning high and bright, and dimly connected that with its influence over him. He seized the extinguisher cap, and by a sudden action pressed it down upon its head. The spirit dropped beneath it, so that the extinguisher covered its whole form. But though Scrooge pressed it down with all its force, he could not hide the light, which streamed from under it in an unbroken flood upon the ground. He was conscious of being exhausted, and overcome by an irresistible drowsiness, and further of being in his own bedroom. He gave the cap a parting squeeze, in which his hand relaxed, and had barely time to reel to bed before he sank into a heavy sleep. And I think, dear friends, that is where I am going to end the stream. If you haven't already followed and you want to be notified of when I will be streaming again, I'm going to try to stream tomorrow to read some more of this story. My Twitter link is down below. There is also a Discord you can join, or a post there what's going to be coming up. Thank you again for joining me tonight for this reading. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly enjoyed reading to you all. And let me see if anyone is online that I can send you over to. Or I may just end the stream. Let us see. And I don't see anybody, so I am just going to end the stream, and I hope to see you all again. Take care. Have a good night, morning, day, whatever time it is where you are. I hope that it is lovely. For those of you that it is nighttime, I hope you sleep well or are sleeping well and have nothing but sweet dreams. Good night.